country as well.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. I love that. So I've got a few questions for you guys. You've told us a little bit about what you do already. I just want to know about the motivation of this organization. So what originally motivated the organization to focus on anti-racism and immigrant rights, particularly at a local level?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we make the, you know, these attacks on migrant rights, these attacks on, you know, Palestine solidarity and all of that, when we make the link between those and the system of capitalism, of imperialism, you know, that is the thing that necessitates state racism. It is what causes, you know, all of these like deportations and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so like primarily, you know, if we care about our neighbors, ourselves, you know, people in our community, if we care about migrants, if we care about anyone who lives in our society, right, we need to direct the fight towards the state, because that's where all of this stuff is coming from, right? And so, you know, this local work is a huge part of that, but, you know, as an organisation, we don't just do local work, we act as an organisation across Britain, right? And it's really important to make those links between what's happening in our communities and what's happening in Britain as a whole, for all of us, for the working class in Britain, right?
Yeah.
Because like racism is a working class issue, you know, migrants' rights is a working class issue, sexism is a working class issue, and so we need to be uniting on these questions and like organising.
So like the national level naturally flows, cascades down to the local level. So whether you're talking about some of our work with, like I mentioned before, with prisoners in Winson Green, whether that be Sat Power campaign, who is someone who was fighting for against the courts and against the prisons when he defended himself against a racist attack, which happened in Birmingham. These things naturally link the local to the national level, and it kind of has to be that way, because if it was just maybe a national level without any local, you know, we have local stores, for example, we have them in city centre, we have them in Handsworth, we have them in other parts of the city, and by organising with people who are the most marginalised, black and Asian workers, for example, they understand that, you know, their rights are tied up with imperialism, they're tied up with being exploited for low wages, or whether it's asylum seekers being exploited locally for, whether it could be by businessmen trying to take advantage of their vulnerable situation. So naturally people gravitate towards what they materially experience in their lives every day through their work, through their lack of work, struggle for housing and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it like connects the national with the local kind of naturally like that. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds quite good. You mentioned a few words there, which I'm just thinking, if there happen to be any listeners out there that weren't exactly sure what you mean by imperialism, how would you explain it? So not just imperialism, can you just explain your organization's how can I say it, mission in the sense of the racism, sexism, but then also just have a little breakdown of the definition of imperialism for the listeners that just might not know?
Yeah, sure.
That's a really good question.
Do you want to take that? I can take half, you can take half.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simplest way to explain imperialism is that, you know, we live in a system of capitalism, right? Imperialism is like the progression of capitalism into this higher stage. So, you know, capitalism is like a system where workers are exploited for profit, right? But then it turns into businesses creating monopolies, and you can see like, you know, how many companies are there in the world, and when you like go up through all of the routes, it's like 3 companies who own all the companies, right?
Yeah.
So that's like a monopoly. But then I guess it turns into like countries needing to exploit other countries in order to maintain you know, the level of profit that's coming in. So that's why we're seeing like, you know, wars. That's why we've seen wars. You know, the World War I was the first imperialist war where like the world was, you know, being fought over. You know, these imperialist powers were looking to like split the world up, split the world's resources up. You know, it's why we're seeing the genocide in Palestine happening, you know, like as a direct result of Britain and other imperialist powers needing the resources within the Middle East, right, to continue getting all the profit they get, and so. Yeah, I guess that's what imperialism is when like capitalism gets to this higher stage, and it turns into, like a bigger form of monopoly, basically.
Yeah, and I think like with a good way to kind of like a lot of people are aware of what colonialism is in terms of maybe when the British ruled in the Caribbean or in India or etc. The modern form that we see is an even more hyper exploitation through these monopolies that you see. So at the end of when a lot of the countries got independence, where Jamaica got its independence, other countries around the world, there was an independence in terms of a political sort of independence, but in an economic sense, they were still being exploited through neo-colonialism and maybe loans through the IMF, stuff to do with British banks and how they facilitate transfers. And there's all sorts of economic things that kind of make this into an even higher form of exploitation. So that's why we it says it on our paper, we fight racism, fight imperialism. So we say that racism here is linked to imperialism abroad. It's a reflection of the fact there's an unequal relationship. So you've got Britain, you've got the US, for example, exploiting other countries around the world, keeping them in this state of being poor, taking their resources and essentially getting rich, especially for us, a small segment of the working class. But in that our mission statement that you said, I guess we exist to kind of build this revolutionary consciousness, a revolutionary working class movement on the streets of Britain. So the stuff we're talking about today on the radio, that's part of it. And it's actually building this movement, getting people to understand these things that we're talking about related to their everyday lives, which will build a movement that's capable of truly challenging things in our society. Because, I mean, as we all know, like these attacks, racist attacks that have happened recently, they're nothing new. Our parents went through the same sort of thing, and we have to ask those questions. Why? And that's kind of what our event is kind of getting to the root cause of.
Okay, that's really quite good, honestly, because you're opening my own eyes, and because I'm African, that's my background. I'm from Zimbabwe, and we were colonized as well by the British, and I understand what you mean in the sense of even though we got the independence, the country's still kind of dependent, a little bit, really. And they've gone through like inflation and stuff like that to the point they don't actually, I think now they use the US dollar, but then they also have like some kind of fiat currency, which, when I visited over there, I was like, so what's this paper? Like, is it real money? What is it? But yeah, it's quite interesting, and I love the cause. Honestly, this is something that's quite near to home for me as well. So moving on to our next question, you mentioned that the recent attacks have been, from what I was reading and stuff, that they've been particularly around like women and stuff. There's been quite a lot of things coming up in the news. Can you talk about how racism and sexism often overlaps in these situations?
So we've got like a really good pamphlet here which talks like just about that, which is, it's good that we brought this. But yeah, did you want to have a go?
So the pamphlet's called Women's Oppression Under Capitalism. I guess the point that is really important is that sexism and racism are both like interlinked, right? And it comes to light when we see women of colour who are part of the working class, and I think it's been especially like clear, recently, in these racially aggravated sexual assaults in the West Midlands. We've seen two, pretty close together, and it is really scary, for women especially, like walking around Birmingham at the moment. But like the oppression of women is intrinsically linked to the working class struggle, right? Like women have always been treated as, secondary to men. They're treated as like unwaged workers. They do like the reproductive labour within the home. And
should we explain what the reproductive labour? Because I didn't know that until what that meant until recently.
I'm sure loads of men. I'm sure there's a few lads out there. They're like, what's that about?
Yeah, because it sounds like you're talking about like the labour of I guess like reproduction. It
Yeah.
kind of makes it
Yeah.
sound like, but it's to do with what stuff happens behind the scenes in the house to enable somebody to go out and do a job, or like for example, like even the washing up, or taking care of the kids, or
Ironing clothes, making dinner.
making dinner. This is all this is all allowing labour to be reproduced the next day, essentially. So yeah.
And so like women are doubly oppressed, right, as you know, workers in the working class, and not only that, but like women of colour are triply oppressed, you know, because they have to deal with being racialized as well, and you know that's just like another layer in it. And I think that's like especially clear when we look at these racist attacks that have happened recently in the West Midlands, because it wasn't, you know, as it happened, you know, they were being racially abused. It just goes to show like how far these layers go, and like, yeah, how it all comes, like it comes from this like oppression of women from capitalism.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation, actually.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the booklet that you have?
Yeah, sure.
The way we can find it?
Yeah, definitely. So if you go on frfi.org.uk, I believe it's /shop, but I could be wrong, but definitely frfi.org.uk, and you'll be able to get not only this pamphlet, so it kind of explains what we're talking about, but there are other ones talking about the environment, or talking about Palestine, talking about
Cuba, Venezuela,
all these topics that are often not discussed in like the mainstream media. So we kind of also act as a independent sort of news outlet in a way to help people understand these topics. But yeah, so this pamphlet itself talks about it kind of takes it from the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, all the way to talking about women and imperialism, talking about women's struggles in the global south. If we're talking about Adivasi women who are what's termed like low caste women in India, who are fighting for their rights, and the global reaction against people who are othered, you know, whether that be trans people, whether that be anybody who's marginalized in our society and can be exploited further. So it kind of, it talks about all these things, and then it ends in what we like to talk about women in the struggle. So instead of talking about women as like a group of people who need to be helped, like given handouts and like sort of in a charity type way, it's better to talk about it in women can empower themselves, just like any marginalized group empowers themselves, and yeah. That's kind of the crux of our argument.
Yeah, and it like highlights women in historic revolutions, right? Women in the Cuban Revolution. These stories are often like not talked about or not highlighted, but we do need to talk about them because, you know, in order for everyone to be equal, we have to be empowering people and like, you know, bringing these examples to light of people who, you know, have like got organized and been part of, like, been an intrinsic part of the revolution.
From like Vietnam to Africa, Burkina Faso, Cuba, like you said, across the Black Panthers in the US, that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. But again, like they also had, not to say that their organization was perfect, but they had women's divisions who were empowering themselves. So that's all tied up with the fight for socialism, and the fact that it's the stuff we talked about before, the reproduction of labour and things like that in societies where they have had a successful socialist revolutions, like Burkina Faso, for example. They were able to eliminate stuff like health problems that women specifically face. They were able to eliminate that within a couple of years, and in other places around the world as well. So you can see it kind of translating into the everyday that people live every single day. In Cuba, for example, the birth rates, the death rate from maternity that was greatly reduced. diseases passed from mother to child are greatly reduced, and even stuff like homelessness has like been almost like it's negligible, and that we know that housing affects women. For example, in this country, women are affected disproportionately in housing. So tackling those things in a systemic way rather than just like from person to person, like, oh, that person is has bad views and that's where sexism comes from. It actually is more useful to look at it on a systemic level and say it comes from the top, it comes from the state, and the policies actually disproportionately affect women or marginalised people, or again, which allows them to be exploited more. So yeah, more easily.
Do you know what? You guys are doing something really amazing, honestly. No, honestly, because do you know what? You're fighting for women like myself, because I'm a mom of two and my background was nursing, and I got to a point where life was lifing, and you know, I had to make a decision whether I wanted to be at work or to look after my kids. And now I'm at home because, you know, there's no job more important to me than being a parent and looking after my kids, you know, and just giving them that set up for the future. And I feel like one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of women are in my position where you're kind of stuck in this, like, I want to work, I want to be able to provide and do all these different things and live my best life, but then at the same time, who's going to raise my kids for me? Do you know? And at the same time, I kind of was like looking at my pay and everything, and obviously women get paid slightly different and stuff like that. So I was like, you know what? God will figure it out. Let me go look after my babies. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because it wasn't really worth it. So, you know, it's amazing what you're doing, honestly.
Oh, thanks.
Honestly. So just to talk about your event a little bit, basically your upcoming event, Racism and Sexism on Our Streets, The State is to Blame. What's been happening recently in the West Midlands that's made this conversation like quite urgent, which I know you've mentioned a few things, but if we can just go into it so we highlight exactly what it is that's going on.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So I guess like the thing that kind of made us make this meeting, obviously we've always been talking about these issues as a whole, but I think it's especially important now because we are seeing this rise in street racism, and not only that, but street racism and sexism, you know, in those racialized sexual assaults on women in our community in the West Midlands, right? But like, I think it's really important because we need to highlight that these things, as Sarjan said before, like these things aren't just happening now. They have been happening. You know, they happened to our parents. They've been happening like to people of color through generations, right? And it's time, like it's getting worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. We need to be organized. We need to fight back. And in order to do that, we need to know who our enemy is, right? And it is not enough to just kind of think that, you know, if I'm not racist, if I just see a racist person and I say, you know, stop being racist, that's not enough, right? Because racism doesn't come from people, it comes from the state, right? Like no one was talking about small boats until the Tories were talking about small boats. No one was talking about hotels before Labour was talking about hotels, right? And I think it's really important to note that this racist storm hasn't just come out of nowhere. It's being whipped up by the government, and that's because, you know, on one hand, while they're doing all these deportations, you know, the Labour government is boasting of record level deportations. You know, they're not even ashamed about it. They're boasting about it. You know, and it's record breaking. It's like deportations that we've never seen, like the likes of until now. And you know that they're stripping people of their citizenships. I mean, I think recent research came out and it shows that I think 3 in 5 people of colour in Britain are at risk of getting their British citizenship stripped. That's 3 in 5. You know, there's literally 3 of us here now. You know? But it is crazy. It's absolutely insane. But like, while they're doing all this like official stuff, like quote unquote official, they're turning to, you know, whipping up these like racist like storms on the streets, to, you know, as another form of immigration control, you know, like creating this like hostile environment, which is a term actually coined by a Labour MP from Birmingham, Liam Byrne, all the way back in like 2008 or something. I think he said that. So like, it just goes to show, right? Like, you know, if we wanna fight this racism that we're seeing, if we want to protect our communities, we need to be organizing against the state itself. You know, it's not you know your regular I don't know. It's not your white neighbor deporting you, right? It's a Labour government. It's not Tommy Robinson deporting you. It's Labour government. And so, like, first and foremost, that is who we need to be fighting against. That's who we need to be organising against. So yeah, I think that's kind of what our event is about.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And I think the reason that we kind of went with like some of this artwork as well, which was drawn by one of our comrades. It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really nice.
So, yeah, it was done by an artist called Sharon Kaur. So it's really, really eye-catching. But it also has, like, for example, the keffiyeh, which relates to Palestinian liberation, and on the title, we actually made sure to say, you know, racism and sexism on our streets, the state is to blame, because as Chi mentioned, the kind of crux of it we want to get to is that these things flow from the state. Even if we're looking as far back as I don't know if you know about when Malcolm X came to Birmingham in 1965. So he came because there was housing segregation in Smethwick on Marshall Street. So basically, people from the Caribbean and people from South Asia were not allowed to buy homes in certain roads. So they were basically kept into more lower cost housing, more overcrowded housing, and those stats play out till today, and it still plays out today. So, but at the time, there was a really racist election happening, where one of the MPs ran on a very racist slogan, and that's often what's focused on, you know, rightly so. However, that slogan didn't come out of nowhere. That MP wasn't just on his own in that. If we trace it back, and we can look through historical records to do this, it goes right to the top of government. It goes to them saying we don't need to provide these areas with funding, and you can even see it in their letters, and it's actually documented. We don't need to provide these areas with funding for healthcare, housing, because essentially they're just here to work, and we don't need to spend too much money on them. I can't remember the exact words, but it was in that vein. And the street racists that we see, for example, the likes of your Tom Robinsons, your sort of business leaders like Nigel Farage, who they all kind of occupy this space. We need to make sure that we see them more as outriders of capitalism, sort of like mercenaries who will do the dirty work of the government in a sanctioned way, rather than seeing them as the be all and end all. We have to make sure we're looking at systemic state racism, because and Akala, actually, I always like to go back to this interview because a lot of people have seen it, but Akala kind of mentioned this when he tackled Tommy Robinson on Question Time about 10 years ago. He said purposely the focus is put on these bigots such as Tommy Robinson rather than systemic racism, because it's more that's the thing that is really at the root of it, and that they don't want you to talk about. So that's why we're talking about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get right back into it. We're just going to have a little short break, and we can continue the conversation, guys. I'm loving this stuff. Like,
thank you so much. It's
keep
been really
telling
good.
the information.
Thank you.
on 98.7 FM. New Style Radio.
Good morning, Birmingham, and we are back on New Style Radio, and this is Tender Talks with your host JT, and live in the studio I've got members of Brom RCG, Chi and Serjan. Did I do
Sergeant.
Sergeant. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna get it before the end of this.
It's okay.
I'm gonna get it. So yeah, just going back to the questions that we was talking about. My next question is the event that you've got on this week. It is this week, isn't it? On Wednesday?
It is, yeah, Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah. So this event, it aims to explore how racism connects to the state and modern day colonialism. How would you explain the connection to someone that might be new to these ideas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what the most simplest way to explain is our paper is called Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism. So we say that we have to understand that racism here in Britain today is a manifestation of imperialism abroad. So in the world, where you've got nations like Britain, the US, the EU bloc, who oppress other countries, exploit them to get their resources, and keep them in a state of dependency on charities, but dependency on loans, dependency on these nations to provide them essentially with crumbs while they're taking masses and masses of their resources with the other hand. That is what imperialism means, essentially, in a sentence. Now, when we're talking about the reflection of racism in this country, historically throughout Britain's capitalist history, the labour that they needed done for an exploitative cost, they've tapped into those countries that they colonised and still dominate in an imperialist fashion to do cheap labour. So essentially what we're seeing today with the immigration laws, we're seeing with the racist infrastructure in this country, it's all a manifestation of exploitation. And that's why you have people in Britain who, if you look at statistically, living in overcrowded households, as well as cultural factors. But if you take those away, you can see a clear correlation between areas. Even in Birmingham, there was a report done in 2005 which analysed housing and healthcare deprivation, whether that be people per GP surgery or whether it be people living in equity of access to a GP surgery, like how far they have to travel, or the housing conditions they're living in, and stuff like that. There is a skew towards people of global majority backgrounds living in these places because historically it's been cheaper and better for the state to do that, so they can exploit people and keep them in that state of vulnerability. So that's essentially what we mean when we say that it reflects imperialism. And there's also a section of the working class who does get bought off by the spoils of imperialism. So you get people sort of. Do you want to talk on that more? I don't want to keep talking. Do you?
I mean, yeah, because of obviously our position in the world, right? We are an imperialist country, an oppressor country that oppresses these other nations, right? And so, because we get all these spoils of imperialism, there's a layer of the working class that gets bought off, from the crumbs of this. So let's say, your white collar workers, people who work in finance or the bank or lawyers or whatever, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
They benefit from having imperialism in place, right? And so, they're part of the working class, but they benefit from imperialism, and so naturally their interests are to uphold imperialism. That's why you get movements that are kind of neutered by this, kind of interest. They say they're anti-racist, but in reality they're not looking at state racism, which is the root of it. They're focusing more on let's take all the flags down or whatever, but not looking at why the flags are there in the first place. Who's emboldened these people to put up these flags. And so, like, I guess that's part of the work that we do as well, right? We need to be fighting against this trend in politics. We need to say, no, let's look at what is really the issue. Let's not get distracted by this stuff. Because again, it's not about, like, you know, reform getting into power or whatever, because at the moment reform's not in power yet. Migrants everywhere in Britain are you know, facing all this hardship and oppression and deportation, all this kind of stuff.
And it's been racist, like, you know what I'm saying? It's been racist. Let's be honest.
I mean.
So that's kind of what we're saying. We're saying that whether that be Reform, whether that be the Green Party, whether that be Labour, Tories, whoever it will be, if it's still under a capitalist, imperialist structure, it's going to replicate the same sort of forms of racism. No matter if you have a celebrity, politician, whoever it could be, saying, oh, we're going to do away with da-da-da-da. And to be honest, nowadays I don't even hear politicians even saying that, because the history, 50, 60, 70 years has shown us that those type of ways of almost like a Marvel type thing, you know, like Marvel movies, getting behind like just a celebrity and, you know, or behind a political party that's still under that racist structure, gets us nowhere, because we're still seeing these attacks today. And that is the reason why, because state power isn't challenged in the way we think it should be. And in the past, if you actually look at movements like in the 70s and the 80s, who actually did have impact immediately in the streets, if we're talking about the early Asian youth movements, we're talking about the Black Power groups, those were the ones who had this notion of racism is a reflection of imperialism. And that's an immediate impact in their streets, with their community, with their neighbours, and the ones that didn't have that were the ones who the state actually encouraged to exist at the expense of the others. So this is actually a history that's not talked about as much as it should be, and that's precisely because it's not useful to talk about it for the state. It's more useful to say, oh, these groups here, they're kind of allowed to exist, and talk about anti-racism, so long as it's not challenging the root cause. So groups like that, within all our global majority communities who did challenge imperialism, were within maybe a couple of decades, they found a way to kind of defund them, if you know what I'm saying, and fund these kind of safer groups who, not to say they didn't have an impact, but they didn't truly have a true challenge to the root cause.
And you can see it, like, you know, some anti-racist groups, they say they're anti-racist, yet they still support the Labour government. You know, year after year, they call for a vote for Labour, for example. I mean, now obviously it's changing a bit because Labour's completely, you know, unmasked itself, right? But like, definitely in like the past, in the past years, you know, they say they're anti-racist, they say they're, you know, anti all of this stuff, but in reality they're supporting the very same structures that breed it, you know, and that's why we need to keep exposing it, keep talking about it.
And people are shut out who want to, you know, everyday people. Like, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows that if you're talking about, like politics, in with those groups, for example, I was talking about, they had a pull of their community because their community knew that their everyday reality was reflected by these deportation laws, by these immigration laws. These were things they're dealing with day to day in their lives. So naturally they were drawn to people or groups who were talking about the state, whereas now you kind of have this, after defunding all these groups and after kind of the state kind of got its acting gear of its strategy on this, many people are shut out. Like, if you talk to your friends, it's depoliticized a whole generation or a whole couple of generations of people, and that's the kind of thing we're trying to fight against as well through our education programs.
Okay, no, honestly, you guys deserve all the help that you can get, honestly.
Thank you.
My next question is, from your experience, how do policies, policing, or wider systems affect migrants and marginalised communities on a day-to-day basis?
So I think I think the best way to talk about this. So we went to a migrant rights protest, which was on Saturday. It was really good. It was organised by the Migrant Rights Workers Coalition, and you had people come down from London on coaches and stuff. So yeah, big shout out to them. But what I got from speaking to one of the organisers, she said, I'm trying to remember her name. Aya. So Aya, if you're listening, she mentioned to me that when they speak to they have sort of focus groups, I guess you could call it focus groups, where they speak to the people they're serving. So they help people with migrant rights and whether they're in the courts fighting for their right to be here and stuff. But she said that when recently they spoke to a group of people, they were wondering what kind of thing they'd say as what their number one concern was, like living in Britain on the streets, blah blah. And she said that they were shocked, but kind of in a good way, that all but one person said that their immediate concern was state racism, which makes sense, because it's like you're dealing with deportation laws, you're dealing with I mean, the rights to asylum in this country has been eroded in front of our eyes, day by day. You're literally living with that stress every day in your life. You might have kids, you might have family back home who you're trying to, eventually bring over, or fleeing from a war that imperialist Britain has caused in the first place.
Yeah.
So you have all this stress on your head. Naturally, you're going to be gravitating towards these things that you're talking about, the systemic stuff, the policing. Because I mean, if we look at we can look at ICE in the US, but we don't even need to go that far. We can just look at the British police. We can look at the police in Birmingham. They rip kids from families and deport people. There's been the Windrush scandal in Birmingham. We all too familiar, or got friends who've got friends of a friend, or a cousin of a cousin who's experienced this firsthand. And there was people deported back to Jamaica who couldn't access healthcare before their deportation. Sorry, before they were deported, they couldn't access healthcare in this country. I believe one person had cancer and he couldn't access healthcare in this country because apparently he was not, deemed worthy or legal to be here. So, and that's the case in a lot of communities in Birmingham. So that's how it relates, and that's how people sort of make that connection. I think, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No,
it's always their everyday lives, like whatever people are going through in their material conditions. That is always what they'll relate to.
Yeah. That's true. That is very true. Okay, so why is solidarity? I can't say this word. I'm so sorry. Solidarity. You know what I'm saying, right? Between the different groups and movements so important right now.
I mean, I guess when you follow all of these things back to its root again, right? It leads back to the same enemy. We've got a Labour government who is, as I say, deporting record-breaking levels of migrants, of people, and it's the same Labour government who is, supporting the genocide in Gaza. It's the same Labour government who's attacking the Palestine Solidarity movement in Britain. To the point where they're letting, 8 brave, political prisoners starve to death, rather than meeting their demands, which I think one of the demands is to shut an arms factory which is directly supplying weapon parts to Israel, to shut that down, and they won't even do that, and it just goes to show how deep these things run, and how we all have the same enemy between these different struggles. And at the end of the day, they aren't different struggles, are they? They're the same struggle. The struggle against sexism, for women's rights, is the same as a struggle against racism. It's the same as a struggle for Palestinian liberation. Same as a struggle in Sudan. It's the same as a struggle in Cuba and in Venezuela, right? And so, the reason why it's so important to link these struggles is because we'll only ever be stronger together. We'll only ever be stronger if we're all fighting together against the same enemy that we have. And you know, if we refuse to be divided along these lines that they're you know, drawing between us, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also is important to have a principled unity as well, because a lot of times unity is kind of thrown around as a way to kind of silence any sort of criticism. So it's kind of stuff that we talked about earlier, how now we're in 2025, there are a lot of sort of groups who kind of will use the sheen of anti-racism to kind of further political careers, or it will be, I don't know what it could be for any sort of thing, but mainly because it benefits them as a
For clout.
For clout, yeah. You can say that, for clout and for their class, like it kind of benefits them to be that way, and have these politics which don't truly challenge the structures that benefit them. So in that sense, we have to also, whilst calling for unity, say we're going to stick by our principles, because it's urgent now. It's been too long now. It's like it's actually in front of our eyes. We can't be but the good thing is, here in Birmingham especially, there is a lot of groups who have got this kind of anti-imperialist outlook now. I mean, like we've got some of them coming to the event on Wednesday, which is really good. So on Wednesday we got a variety of different groups coming. So we've got Queers for Palestine coming. We've got the Indian Workers Association, Kashmir Diaspora UK. We've got Black Europeans who are coming, Young Struggle, YEC, India Labour Solidarity. So there's an Inspire community from South Birmingham. So these are all sort of people we've kind of over a few months been talking to, and understand that they kind of see imperialism as something that does need to be talked about and needs to be challenged in that sort of way. So that in that sense, solidarity is very, very important, because otherwise we're siloed. We can't. We're put into our little group split, and doing that we haven't got the strength to do it. Whereas together, you'll see it like in a room. You'll see it in a room where there's a few groups together who kind of have similar sort of outlooks, and you can feel the energy, and even that is something. So yeah.
And I mean, like, now more than ever, it's so important to actually get organised, because you know, as we're seeing, the British state is so organised. They've got the police, they've got the racist police, they've got the quote unquote justice system. You know, they've got immigration, prisons.
Fight the power.
Exactly. They've got prisons. They've got all the stuff that like works together to keep us oppressed. Even though, you know, we're so many, and relatively they're so few, but they still manage to keep us oppressed through these organised structures, right? So in order to combat that, in order to fight against that, we need to get organised ourselves. We need to get educated. We need to know who our enemy is. We need to organise to fight against that enemy. And even like the benefits of, like, when we say organised, we mean sort of, so us as like a collective group, we can sort of decide, okay, there's this happening today, there's this happening tomorrow. How can we organise our efforts together? How can we efficiently use our time? You know, people have hard lives. Like if you're doing it on your own and you're trying to do an individualist sort of solo mission, it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be very, very demoralising as well. Whereas when you're in an organised group, you can lean on each other, and you don't have to do everything yourself. So I think that's something that my mindset changed over time, because when I kind of approached, like when I was learning about fight race and fight imperialism, or RCG Brom, I found that, you know, there were people who I could sort of lean on. I could ask for advice. I could read with people and try to understand these things I don't understand. And very, very quickly, you are able to understand, and you kind of understand the power of collective action. People coming together in an organised sense. Yeah, because it's completely necessary.
Yeah, it's completely necessary. Like, honestly, I don't even think that I understood half the things that I read before, because even like talking about like I was always interested in colonialism and this, that, and the other, but it was only when I started reading with other people, especially people who are maybe more understood the works better than me, that I was able to kind of really understand, and then eventually understand like how to orient my anger, where to orient it towards, and where would be the most efficient way.
Yeah, how to channel that energy. I know
so,
all about that. Okay, so because we are running a little bit tight on time, I want you guys to get your chance to let us know more about your event, where it's going to be, who it's for, and any accessibility like things that we need to know about the event.
So anyone is welcome to this event. It's going to be an open discussion, so everyone is going to hopefully be able to get the chance to contribute, if we have time. It is this Wednesday, 7 p.m. At Ethion Cafe, and that's in City Centre on Cannon Street.
Back at House of Fraser.
Yeah, back at House of Fraser. But yeah, as I say, everyone's welcome. Everyone who wants to learn more, who has something to contribute. And accessibility-wise, there is a lift if it's upstairs, but there's a lift if you need it. And just get in contact with us if you have any specific worries on Birmingham RCG Instagram account.
Yeah, it's an open meeting, so it's a public meeting, and it's an open mic'd meeting. So if anybody wants to come, even if you have no understanding of like exactly what it is, and you have questions, this is the place to be. If you want to learn more about how you combat racism and sexism on our streets in an organised fashion, this is the place for that. If you want to pick up a paper or a pamphlet, what we've spoken about today, that would be the place for that. And if you want to meet like-minded people, that's the place for that as well. So yeah, please come down. Everybody's very welcome. We make a concerted effort to have an open mic and open discussion, even if there's disagreements. It's encouraged, because eventually you'll get to the crux of the issue by debating things out or by reasoning things out with people. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a really good, lively event. Yeah, we're really looking forward to it. So
I'm going to try and make it myself.
Yeah, please do.
Well, as I mentioned, I've got kids. Is it appropriate environment if maybe my 15-year-old could come with me?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
There's definitely going to be people of all ages there.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
We won't be swearing or anything like that.
No, because you know what? I think the children that are growing up now, they are the future at the end of the day, and instead of certain things, learning about it once you're an adult, because I feel like the 90s 80s babies, we're mad, we're really angry because there's a lot of things that we didn't learn about, even though we saw it all happening and everything, but it's now we're really catching on, and some of us are the corporate people and stuff that are just well, it doesn't bother me, so I'm not fazed by it. But then there's a whole load of us who are really affected by a lot of things that you mentioned. So it is really good that the people out there that we've got children and stuff like that, we're teaching them this so that they know by the time they're hitting 18, 19, they kind of understand how this world runs, and hopefully things will be different by then.
And I mean, it affects them as well, right? You've got police arresting young black kids, you've got all this stuff, it's happening to them, so it's important for them to understand that and understand where to put that anger, where to put that energy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, historically, a lot of the movements have arisen from the youth, because youth have the energy, and they have the they're able to be they're able to understand, because they see everything in their day-to-day lives, and they see the brunt of it as well, because they can experience within their household, they can see how their parents are affected, they can see they're not yet split up into these little silos and stuff. They're very much connected in their community, for their schools or whatever, it could be college or whatever. So yeah, and they're not all of them anyway, not completely burdened with work and stuff. So yeah, that's a lot of the reasons why youth movements have been very important in the past.
And they're fearless.
Yeah,
they're fearless. No, honestly, because I feel the older folk, because we've gone through so much, that fear of things kind of stops us from speaking up and standing up for what's right, because you're like, oh my God, because I saw this, what happened to them people. But I feel like the younger people now, they're fearless, honestly. Okay, so just to wrap up everything, is there a final message that you want to tell the listeners today? And you can then just remind us again where the event is, what time, and how we can get there.
I think we'll always just say fight racism, fight imperialism, and get organised. And it's like completely necessary to do that. So if anything we've talked about today has kind of struck a chord with you, or you agree that it's important, then please get in touch. Come to the meeting on Wednesday, which again is this Wednesday, 7 p.m. Ethion Cafe in Cannon Street. It's by House of Fraser in Birmingham City Centre. And yeah, everyone's welcome. Please come along. We'll be really happy to see you there.
Yeah, and if you want to follow us up, follow us on at Birmingham RCG. That's Birmingham RCG. I was going to spell Birmingham out, but I think everyone knows that's spelled Birmingham. At Birmingham RCG. So follow us on there, drop us a message. You can send a request, frfi.org.uk /join, and you can, get in touch with a local branch. If you're listening outside Birmingham as well, we have branches in London, four branches in each corner of London, Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, Brighton.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Glasgow.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So, please get in touch. Please come down. Again, 17th of the 12th. That's on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Ethion Cafe, around the back of House of Fraser. You can't miss it. There's a big orange sign, and then up a flight of stairs, and you're there, or the accessible lift. B2 5EN is the postcode. Yeah, everyone's welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us, JT.
No, thank you guys.
And New
for
Style and
coming
Breakthrough
in.
TV all day. Breakthrough TV always like supporting all the community events. Yeah.
No, honestly, I'm so grateful for you coming in and just giving us all that information. Honestly, it's definitely a movement that I want to get behind, and hopefully the rest of Birmingham is going to wake up as well and be like, yeah, this is something we need to get behind and support this movement, because it does benefit all of us at the end of the day, because we're all interlinked at the end of the day. There's no one that doesn't need anyone. So yeah,
100%.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, JT. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
You're listening to Birmingham's Big Community